Are we starting? I didn't even realize. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Zirogiannis, and we're going to be talking tonight about our one summer, one book, one Oceanside read, A Monster Calls. And my very special guest is teacher extraordinaire from Oceanside High School, Mr. Jason Manning. And the crowd goes wild. Thanks for joining our show, Mr. Manning.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I see you and I have a different version of the book. For those of you who are picking up this book this summer, there are two versions. One is fancy and illustrated, and this one has no illustrations. So
I appreciated you giving me the picture version. It helped.
It helped getting through the story.
It did help.
Well, thank you. I'm hoping that you could take some time with us to answer some questions about the book. Do you think you could start off by sharing your favorite part, maybe reading a little bit from it, and maybe telling us why it was your favorite part?
Sure. The passage that I selected was the tree, the monster, explaining to Connor who he is. And I'll read a portion of the passage, and then I'll tell you why.
Perfect.
I liked it here in a second. All right, so this is, again, the tree, the monster, speaking to Connor. He says, "Who am I?" the monster repeated, still roaring. "I am the spine that the mountains hang upon. I am the tears that the rivers cry. I am the lungs that breathe the wind. I am the wolf that kills the stag, the hawk that kills the mouse, the spider that kills the fly. I am the stag, the mouse, and the fly that are eaten. I am the snake of the world devouring its tail. I am everything untamed and untamable." It brought Connor up close to its eye. "I am this wild earth. Come for you, Connor O'Malley." And Connor looked and he said, "You look like a tree." And I thought that was the response of Connor is what I thought was so cool.
What about it?
It sounds like one of my students. Really. We get into, as teachers, we get into these passionate stories, and sometimes they look at you and go, all right, it just sounds like a normal story. So I really appreciated that back and forth between the monster and Connor.
And you really read it with passion.
Oh,
so
thanks.
impressive. You should.
Thanks. That was my first out loud read. I didn't.
Oh, it was with no rehearsal?
Yeah, no
you
rehearsal.
You should absolutely join the English department.
I don't know.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit.
Sure.
For my part, we focused on the two chapters, and I'm going to pull apart. And I don't know if it was my favorite part, but I loved the way that Connor talks about grandmothers, and he talks about how he's met Lily's grandmother a few times, and she portrays the typical picture of what one would think a grandmother is, and then he becomes very critical of his own grandmother in his description of her. And I just laugh because one day I'll be a grandmother, and I hope I'm more like the description for his grandmother. So he says Connor's grandma wasn't like other grandmas. He'd met Lily's grandma loads of times, and she was how grandmas were supposed to be, crinkly and smiley with white hair and the whole lot. And I'll skip down a bit. But Connor's grandma wore tailored pantsuits, dyed her hair to keep out the gray, and said things that made no sense at all, like 60 is the new 50, or classic cars need the most expensive polish. What did that even mean? She emailed birthday cards, would argue with waiters over wine, and still had a job. Her house was even worse, filled with expensive old things you could never touch, like a clock she wouldn't let the cleaning lady dust, which was another thing. What kind of grandma had a cleaning lady? And it was like something like this woman was really not so unusual. She worked, she liked to get dressed up. What else? You know, she had a cleaning lady, yet he could not fathom that a grandmother could be like this. So I thought it gave a little bit of a light. In a book that's not so light, I thought it was a little bit of a humorous moment. I also liked how the author worked the clock in there, because we know how important time becomes to the story and the clock becomes later on. So I thought that was a good part.
And you can see how Connor sees his grandmother, at least early in the book, that Connor sees his grandmother as, you know, someone that possibly might be coming in to replace his mom.
Yeah.
And there's a little tension there.
Absolutely.
Because that, or at least the way he perceives it. So I picked that up early.
Yeah, it's hard to get a sense at this point if he always had not a great relationship with his grandmother, or if now only because he's starting to see that she's trying to fill the void that might be left behind, or the void of his mom being sick, if now he's starting to feel negatively about her. So
Right.
I'm wondering, you know, which one happened first.
And you're much more polished, by the way, at reading aloud.
No, I felt like you had much more energy. I felt a little bit like I was outshined there. So I'm not sure I'll be inviting you back on my show anytime soon, at least not to talk about books.
Okay.
Do you think the monster is real, or do you think it's a product of Connor's imagination?
I think it is real.
Okay.
I think it's real because if you perceive something to be real, doesn't that make it real? You know, so it's more of a question about perception and what your own thoughts are.
Okay.
And if for Connor it's a real thought, then it's real. It might not necessarily be, something that you could tangibly touch.
But for him,
But
it
for him,
actually
it's real.
is. You know, I had a hard time deciding, and even to the end of the book, I'm not 100% sure where I fall. Is it real? Is it not? I mean, and the author does, you know, there was the part when he wakes up in the morning, and after having that first dialogue where the monster tells that he's going to tell him 3 tales and Connor's going to have to tell him the 4th, you know, he says he switched on his lamp, his floor was covered in poisonous red yew tree berries, which had all somehow come in through a closed and locked window.
Right.
So at that point, I imagined the scene as being a product of his imagination, but clearly those lines were put in to say there can be doubt here for the reader. Like, is it that product of the imagination, or is this monster actually real?
Right.
But like, I like what you said. Like, it's real for the person who
It's-
believes it's real.
Right, it's about validating his feelings.
Right.
And if he feels that it's real because of how he's feeling and the anxiety he has when he goes to sleep at night,
Right.
then yeah, it's absolutely real.
Absolutely. Why do you think in the chapter called Grandma, Connor really doesn't take this opportunity to share his feelings with his grandmother about what's going on? Why do you think he keeps sort of a quiet tone about himself?
I don't think Connor has accepted the fact yet that his mother is sick. And anything that reminds him that his mother is sick, he seems to reject. So when his grandmother comes to visit him, he sees that as, you're here to help me because my mom is sick.
Right.
And I don't want to deal with that.
She becomes almost, I feel like, the enemy.
Right.
You know, and later on we meet the father, and he somehow will serve that role too. And look at his relationship with his friend Lily. It sort of starts to fall apart. It seems like anyone who knows the truth about him or at all grounds him in the reality of what might be happening.
Right, he doesn't want to be around.
Yes, suddenly becomes his enemy, and he's pushing them away instead of trying to bring them closer so that he feels a sense of connection or a sense of safety. It's almost like he doesn't want to feel safe, or
Right.
maybe he just wants to reject the idea that his mom.
Right. He doesn't
Might not
want
be.
to accept the fact
Right.
that something is happening here.
I think too, and I don't know how you feel, I think, and maybe as a parent I can understand this, but I feel like his mom tries to shelter him a little bit from the reality, or do you think I'm wrong about that at this point in the book?
No, I can see evidence of that. I mean, there were times where she was sick and he said, well, that's normal after a couple days, but she'll be better. You know, it's like he's trying to focus on the positive instead of accepting,
Yeah.
what's really happening.
I mean, there was a line in the grandma chapter where she says to him, little boys shouldn't clean the counter unless they're asked to.
Right.
But Connor's so into a routine of, taking care of his mom and being the caregiver there and growing up so fast. It just really does show you how he sort of just accepted this role and is okay with this being or at
Yeah.
least we think at this point, is okay with him being, this is his role and this is where his life is at right now, but that someday maybe it's going to change
Yeah.
and he can push these people away. Did anything surprise you about these 2 chapters that we read? Well, we read the whole book. I don't want anyone to think we didn't read the whole book, but we're focusing on just 2 chapters.
I was surprised that the monster told Connor that when I'm done with these 3 stories, you have to tell me your truth. And projecting ahead, I found myself as I'm reading, like trying to figure out what Connor's truth was going to be.
Right.
And I had different thoughts and different theories, but I was surprised about that. I'm not just going to tell you 3 stories. In return, you're going to have to tell me 1.
It's a give and take
Yeah.
relationship with the monster. I think, and I don't want to give away too much of the end, but I don't know that I was surprised by some of the things in the chapter with the monster initially. I think I went back when we reread it in order to prepare for tonight's interview. When we went back to talk about it, I think I was surprised in light of how the book ends. So, just how he says to him, "You're going to tell me that fourth tale, you're going to need something from me." And there were a couple of lines that didn't mean too much to me and didn't necessarily surprise me. But then when looking in the whole context of the book, rereading it, I was like, okay, that's a little bit surprising. But I don't know that anything stuck out to me in those two. Maybe the negative relationship with the grandmother and how he was, I would have thought family would have been, especially that his father isn't in the picture. His grandma was really all he had.
Right.
But I think we learn a little bit about Connor, and we see that he has separated himself from everyone. And I don't know, A Monster Calls is a very interesting title for the book in the sense that I think it's given people who haven't read it yet the wrong impression. I've had people come to me and say, this book is it about scary monsters? Like, does it belong in our horror course here? And then when they start to read it, they realize, yes, it's about a monster, but there's a whole lot more to it.
Right.
So can you talk to me a little bit, maybe what would be an alternative title that could work for this book, or if you think this title works in the sense of the story as a whole?
Well, right now I see the monster as one's own inner demon. So possibly something along those lines, the inner demon or the problems within, something that Connor is struggling with. And full disclosure, I haven't finished it. I'm getting there, but that's
We might
how.
have said too much to Jason.
That's-
Mr. Manning.
That's how I've taken it so far.
Okay.
The monster is something that Connor is dealing with,
Yeah.
and how he, ultimate what the outcome is, it's going to reveal itself. At least that's what I'm anticipating.
I think that for me, it's going to be, I think the title, and I think A Monster Calls works once you've completed the whole book. I think it is a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, it does throw people off to potential, like if you're in the bookstore and you see A Monster Calls, you might pick it up and think like, oh, this is going to be a scary, like, Halloween story, which it isn't. But I think truth is at the heart of the story, and the fear of the truth and getting truth out. So there's a book by Avi called Nothing But the Truth, and all I could think about was that would have been an awesome title for this book, because not to give away anything that'll ruin it for you in the ending, but it really does come full circle, and the truth becomes everything for Connor, for the monster. And I think it's that truth that's inside him that's keeping him from accepting reality that really is the theme that pushes through to the entire story. So I think something that would have to do with, I guess, how scary the truth is.
Yeah.
Because in essence, when you read this story and the tales he tells, it really is the truth that is so scary. Reality is so much scarier than a made-up monster.
Right.
So that's what it would be for me.
And I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the ending.
Excellent. Well, we hope that, I want to thank Mr. Manning for
Thank you.
sharing his thoughts about these two chapters with us. I want to thank all of you in Oceanside who are picking up a copy of A Monster Calls this summer. I hope that you're going to participate in Oceanside's first ever community read. So don't forget, one summer, one book, one Oceanside. And I want to thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys.